Nice to meet you. My name is Topolski. I'm the Director of Extraction at Satori over in Middlebury, Vermont. I'm joined with Keith Griswold as well, too.
Yeah, I have a question. My name is Keith Griswold. I'm the owner and operating manager of Green Mountain Scientific in Hartford.
Appreciate it. So today we're here to talk to you guys about best practices for identifying and manufacturing cannabis concentrates. And just to kind of start it off, if you guys have any time throughout this, any questions you want to shoot out to us, please just raise your hand, stop, and we'll kind of go into a little Q&A about this. Kind of like a overarching of extraction, or the kind of type of extraction process there are. So in the state of Vermont, you'll find ethanol extraction, CO2 extraction, ice water extraction, dry sift extraction, and hydrocarbon extraction. From that, you're going to have a couple that are solvent-based extraction types, so we'll kind of go into a deeper dive in a couple of slides. And then solvent-free extraction types being dry sift or ice water extraction process. Now, of all those process types, you can make a bunch of varying different type of output products. And not one extraction type necessarily is the only end-all, be-all to create your end goal product, and really about what works best for your starting material as well as your facilities. Different type of cannabis concentrates that you could produce are distillates. Those are primarily going to be products that you find in vape cartridges or used to make edibles. Isolates, that's going to be typically used as well for edibles, topicals, or can be used for solid concentrates to consume. Cured and live rosin, that's going to be an ice water extraction process made whether from dry cured product or fresh frozen whole plant cannabis. You have hash and sift, which is going to effectively be a very refined keef like you get in the bottom of your grinder when you're grinding up flour. It's a little bit cleaner and more pure, refined usually with static. You have water hash, which is going to be effectively a very similar product to that dry sift. Instead of using mechanical separation on screens, you're going to be using ice and water and agitation to knock off those trichome heads from the actual biomass. You have THCA diamonds. These are going to be those 99.9% crystalline diamonds you see that then have the terpenes and flavonoids that give you that characteristic expression of cannabis reintroduced to it to actually give you that sensory kind of effect and not just that singular plateau. You then have concentrates like batter and shatter. If you look on the picture to the right, that's a good representation of batter. It's going to be a very homogeneous extract that typically has a very wet glisten on the top of the terpenes beginning to naturally separate from the THCA. And then shatter is going to be more of a homogeneous, brittle, glass-like substance. All of these products effectively have a very similar blend of cannabinoids and terpenes other than distillates. And it's really about the type of, whether it's temperature or input material variations you can do to get different consistencies. That was a lot. Is there any questions about this consistency before we go into the next? Perfect. So what is cured versus live material? I feel like you see those words in dispensaries all the time about people talking about cured resin, cured rosin, live rosin. And you could achieve both from a solvent and a solvent-free point, a cured or live product. What it's signifying is that the material was either dried and then extracted, or chopped, frozen, and then extracted. So you may ask yourself, why would you want one versus the other, and where are the benefits for that? For dried cured cannabis, you're going to find that a lot of the terpenes that begin to off-gas and are volatile will begin to change into the process and become a little bit more smooth and palatable. And then being from a dry cured product, typically that's going to be a more cost-effective solution for the consumer, allowing for a more budget-friendly type of product. You have live products, which typically you're taking from a live plant, chopping it, and putting it into a freezer within 30 minutes or less. The thought behind that is that all those really, really volatile terpenes that begin to off-gas as you're chopping it, the same reason why when you go into a dry room and it smells so fragrant like weed, is that all those terpenes are beginning to evaporate off into the air. By freezing it, you can really try and promote as much capture and retention of those terpenes, and then in turn get a much more, to me, representative of that live plant ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes, and really get a more flavor-forward type of extract. So kind of different ice water extraction processes. So you have the ice water extraction. So here you can see in the video here, we have us taking fresh frozen whole plant cannabis right now, and what we're going to do is load that up into an agitation vessel with RO water and a light amount of ice. We're going to allow that material to acclimate to the same temperature and have the ice begin to knock off with the water the trichome heads from the actual plant material. From that, the trichome heads will begin to suspend down into the solution where they'll be collected into various bags. I'll kind of give it a sec to let the video play. Kind of pros and cons versus ice water extraction. In Vermont, it's one of the quickest growing product classes it seems to be. You have so many manufacturers who are doing ice water extraction and dry sift. It's very economical to start compared to other extraction types. You can get a couple of bags for just a few $100s and start making a really high quality and competitive product. You don't need to have a very fancy facility to be able to make some really, really competitive, amazing resin. What's cool about it as well too is that you vary the microns. So there's a lot of different qualities that come from hash. It's very much like a grading system, which allows you to be able to achieve a bunch of different price points and to a bunch of different type of consumers. So you could have your higher end full melt water hash that's going to be so true to the plant that you can just consume in its palate staining. But then you could also take a wider range and then be able to make a really cost effective solventless rosin vape that all of a sudden competes with a distillate vape on the market. Now, cons to the ice water extraction process is very labor intensive. A lot of times it's typically manually agitating biomass. Other times you're working with genetics that are not typically viable for solventless extraction. So when we go into like a solvent-based extraction, a lot of those processes are tied to the cannabinoid inputs, whereas the solventless extraction is more about the actual structure of the trichome head and how it attaches to that gland and how easy it is to separate from that gland. So with that, you have a much more limited variety of flavors that you can do in this process compared to other types. So dry sift extraction, effectively a very similar type of output product where this is going to be a consumable hash that could be either consumed as a vape or added to flour or even turned into rosin if you want. The difference between this compared to ice water extraction is instead of using actual ice water and agitating it off, you're going to be using screens. And you're going to be manually with your hands kind of pushing off or tumbling weed in a sifter the trichome heads from the plant material. This way is a very fantastic option for cured material. It's a really great way to be able to take a secondary byproduct, whether it's dry trim, and then create a really high quality dry sift for edibles or for vape cartridges. The cons of this is that it's also extremely labor intensive. You have to tumble and do a lot of manual static refinement, which ends up taking typically a few hours to get to a product that would be comparative to like an ice water extraction quality product. Kind of on like consistencies and texture guides. There's a lot of different consistencies when you go into a Vermont retail dispensary. You have fresh pressed rosin, you have diamonds, you have cold cure rosin, and there's not a lot of clarity about what all those are and what are the pros and cons between them. I'm going to cover today the fresh pressed rosin, the cold cure rosin, and the rosin jam, and kind of walk you through how those processes are made and what kind of product will maybe make best sense for you depending on what you're looking for. What are the pictures of these? So here I have, these are all from the exact same batch of material, got extracted, the various stages of the solvent extraction rosin. So on the left here we have a fresh pressed rosin. That's going to be, as the words are, right after it's pressed, and you package it right into the actual concentrate. At that point in its life cycle, that is when it's going to have the highest amount of volatile terpenes still present in that concentrate. And if you're really looking for a very flavor-forward experience, that's really going to be your best representation of what that live plant has done. Now, from a consumer perspective, workability is a very important factor when trying to figure out what is the best concentrate for me to make. That's typically where I feel when cold cure is what you see is very common. You want to have something that's easy for the consumer to go and scoop a very repeatable size amount to consume, and have that kind of consistency as they go about it. And it kind of changes a little bit of two different ways, right? So in flour, we dry and cure flour, and in that we see certain genetics start to express different types of flavors and aromas throughout that process as terpenes degrade into other terpenes. Fresh press and cold cure are the exact same thing. So if you stop by my booth later, I could show you a live representation in person. Certain strains, as fresh press, give off very different aromas and flavors as their cold cure variants of that. So you can really find what works best for your palate by trying to work with different strains and having them in different form factors. Now rosin jam, which you can see is more of like a THCA diamond crystalline structure of that. We're going to add actually additional heat to that point from the cold cure rosin, and what that does is allow the terpenes to begin to naturally separate from all the THCA and then promote a crystal structure of that THCA. What you'll find with a concentrate of a rosin jam compared to say a cold cure is that a rosin jam at a retail level is going to be very flavor forward and expressive. It's going to have a very loud nose as you open that up, but you're going to inherently lose some of that flavor by having an extra amount of heat begin to degrade that profile. So it really depends what you're looking for, whether you want to have the most amount of volatile terps reserved, or if you want to make sure that like at a retail level, when someone opens something, They really know what that flavor is going to be, and it's going to be true to the actual taste and nose. Air dried and freeze dried. So this is a pretty interesting thing. When I look at the amount of hash typically made in Vermont right now in the retail setting, primarily a lot of it is freeze dried hash. That's a very industry standard right now. That's become very popular because you could quickly remove all the moisture and mitigate a lot of opportunities for microbial growth. I'll show you some different kind of various consistencies and kind of show you benefits between the two. On the left here we have an air dried hash. That's going to be dried effectively at a wine cooler type of setting over a set period of time, typically 1 to 2 weeks. Versus on the right, we have a freeze-dried hash. That's going to be a product that is finished in about 18 hours from the actual point of creation. Air-dried hash. So what are the pros for it, right? The biggest thing is that very low upfront cost. You could be able to properly air-dry hash in your refrigerator. If you have a pizza box and a refrigerator and time and patience, you can make a really clean quality product that can make either a great bubble hash or even a live rosin. Air-dried hash gives typically a more cured profile when we're talking about terpenes beginning to degrade over time and why the importance of as fresh as possible. Air-dried hash has some degradation happening, so you'll have more of like a cured flower type of taste, which for some consumers really prefer. And then this, craft credibility. When you look at air-dried hash, it's very much an art, this commercial process. It's not just your environment, but how you're working with the resin and the material, and it's very strain and genetic dependent. So with that, it allows for small craft producers to be able to really express themselves in this product class, whereas on a freeze-dried product, you may have a more standardized visual cue on your product compared to someone else. Cons for air dry, and the biggest one, and I think why freeze drying is so popular, is that you have a very high risk for microbial growth by having a high amount of moisture in for a set period of time. So when going down the air dry route, it's very important that you make sure you have your environment and parameters all dialed in. That way you don't make any product that is haphazardous to consume. Freeze-dried hash. So kind of pros, so industry standard in Vermont. This typically takes, depending on the batch size, anywhere from 18 to 24 hours. So a very quick turnaround time. And then B, with how quick you go on that dry, you typically have a much higher terpene retention than other extraction methods from that. For instance, if you take, say, an air-dried and fresh frozen of the same material, you could typically almost see 1 to 2% higher terpene content on that freeze-dried hash versus the air-dried counterpart from that. With the quick dry, you really mitigate a lot of risk for microbial growth and also significantly increase your shelf stability. One big con for both air-dried and freeze-dried hash is that you need a cold chain of command to be able to sell this product. So from the point of inception all the way to the point of the retailer giving it to the consumer, this product needs to typically be kept below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That proves to be very difficult and adds an extra premium for that product, just to be able to have that quality transport. Right, so THC distillates. Now we moved past the solvent-free processes, and now we're going to go to the solvent-based extraction types. So here we have a jar of THC distillate in this picture. THC distillate typically is going to be around a 90 to 99% THC purity. Typically, a lot of type 1 cannabis grown is very single cannabinoid focused. So in most THC distillates, you'll have anywhere from 1 to 3% minor cannabinoids, but it's primarily going to be just delta-9 more often than not. This product is going to be completely flavorless and odorless. You remove all the characteristic properties from that throughout the extraction process. This makes it a really great intermediate for edibles. That way you don't have that clash of flavor from cannabis and the terpenes from that. And also makes a really great base for vape cartridges for you to reintroduce terpenes, whether they're cannabis derived or botanically derived. So ethanol extraction. So we in Middlebury do ethanol extraction to produce THC distillate and are also soon to do hydrocarbon extraction as well. Ethanol extraction is really great because it's grabbing a broad spectrum of cannabinoids, right? So you can take biomass and it's going to have a opportunity to grab onto your minor cannabinoids as well as your THCA. It's very scalable as well too. So if you're a manufacturer and you're looking to be able to do a large volume, it's a very quick process type to want to look towards versus a solvent-free process that's very labor intensive. While the capital to be able to do solvent-based extraction is higher, the throughput is almost 5 to 6x. So you're really able to move through a good amount of material and create a really high quality and repeatable product because of it. Typically you're going to find that solvent-based extractions, especially ethanol-based extractions, are going to be more cost-effective than other solvent process types. These are going to be very more budget-friendly, distillate-type vape products that wouldn't get the same price point as like a live resin or a live rosin product would. CO2 extraction. So this is a really cool extraction type and it's very popular in Vermont. It's a highly tunable extraction. You're really able to selectively grab onto different types of components you want by manipulating pressure and temperature. And you can make products like those pure cannabis-derived terpenes that are really high quality and allow you to add these cool characteristic properties, whether it's into your vapes or beverages or edibles. It really opens up a very wide world of flavor and aroma for what you can do for it. Some cons would be more of the higher end products, I would say. So if you're a solid concentrate consumer, you're typically looking for hashes or rosin or diamond. And typically it takes a lot more steps post-processing to be able to achieve those same products with CO2. So when you're evaluating as a manufacturer what would be best for you, that's something you want to keep in mind is, are you going for flavors and aromas? Are you going for solid concentrates? Not one shoe fits all. Hydrocarbon extraction. This is a really cool one. So we do propane extraction in Middlebury, Vermont. Propane is really good at grabbing onto those lighter volatile terpenes. So if you're looking for a very high terpene, high flavonoid forward extract, propane is a fantastic solvent to use. It makes a very wide range of products. So all the way from doing sugars and batters and shatters and diamonds you could achieve, but you could also make crude oil for distillate as well too. So you have a lot of flexibility in what type of output products you can do. And it also allows you to do a more true to the plant experience by having it be propane forward, by really promoting as much terpene retention as possible. Some big cons though is that, first off, it's a very highly flammable solvent, and the upfront cost capital and just C1, D1 boost to be able to safely operate this equipment is very cost effective and prohibitive. So it's definitely something that's a really great product type, but a little bit more inaccessible at times, unfortunately, which is why I think we see more solventless products kind of reigning king in most markets. And that was it. If there's any questions about anything I went over, I feel like, please let me know. Go over to Keith there.
Eli's not in the room, is he? I uploaded my presentation to Google Drive. So let's see if I can pull that up. So Joey, that was a great, practical comparison of some of the more common extraction techniques that are used, not just here in Vermont, but pretty much nationally, I would say, and globally. Kind of understanding the different products, the different profiles of the concentrates that you can pull out of each extraction method. It's important to really understand what your end product is. Sorry, I can't talk and click at the same time. So great.
Do you guys have any questions about any of the product types or kind of different product types you guys may be enjoying you want some further clarity on?
Just a quick question. Thank you for that awesome overview of the 8 different types and the processes that you go through to get these products. I was just kind of curious about weighing risk factors, since we all know tariffs are about to have our cost-benefit analysis kind of get broken. Other than cold chain transportation, do you see any other things that growers should be paying attention to if they're hoping to start to look at?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great question. One thing definitely to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about like solvent-based extraction, is that as you're building out your lab, that's definitely a huge shift going on right now in the market, and the cost of this equipment is almost overnight increasing by 30%. So when building out a lab, it's definitely important to look for both, state-made equipment as well. But that's why maybe like a solvent-free extraction type may be kind of the best entry into that market. That could give you a very quick, $5,000 to $10,000 investment to create some really quality products as you build out a further lab. Because yeah, the tariffs are absolutely going to impact the price of stainless steel and all the equipment. We're already seeing it across the board.
And thank you for that 30% number, that helps.
Yeah, of course.
What is the mechanism by which a fresh press turns into a cold cure, and then you put the fresh into a batter?
Yeah, absolutely. So that typically starts on a nucleation point, right? And that's very genetic depending about how you could have that start. So there's some strains like Tropicana cookies, you could press that fresh press, and it's going to take almost 3 to 5 days at room temperature before you start to see a real shift in consistency from that. That's typically going to be a blend of a type of minor terpenes and minor cannabinoids that promote that nucleation, or you could be able to assist that as well, whether it's with heat or agitation. So it's kind of a little bit of complexity between that. I always find if you're trying to maintain that fresh press consistency, the trick is to have it as little agitation as possible and keep it as far away from heat as possible, and that will really slow the process down. And by always then, once you get that product in that consistency type, freezing it will greatly maintain that actual consistency type.
And the advantage is being able to get a replicable scoop that's easy to get out instead of being sticky.
Yeah, so that for cold cure, which I believe you're talking about, that I think is much more workable for the end consumer. And exactly, if you get a much more repeatable scoop from that, whereas like a fresh press rosin, it's going to be very sappy, it's going to kind of tail as you pull from that. So if you're looking for, you want to take the same consumption amount every single time, I would recommend looking towards like a cold cure rosin over a fresh press or even a rosin jam product.
Do you lose any terpenes in the process, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the degradation begins right from the fresh press all the way to the rosin dram, and you would find that in between each step, you're going to have a pretty meaningful amount of degradation from that profile. Now, things different change, right? So some people may find that on the fresh press, that abundance of volatile terpenes may actually be a little bit too harsh for them, or doesn't actually like hit their palate in the way that they want for it, and they'll prefer cold cure. If you're not looking for that and really just want to have the maximum amount of the terpenes and flavonoids into that, I would recommend looking towards the fresh press every single time, but then consuming it as it changes over time, because you're going to find that for some strains, you may prefer the cold cure variant over the fresh press. So by purchasing a fresh press, you really create that luxury of finding out where in that pocket of curing is best for you.
Thank you.
Awesome, what's up?
How are you keeping the fresh press from curing over time in, like, on the shelves between lab tests and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. That has proven to be one of the most difficult points of selling solventless extractions in a retail setting in any market, not just Vermont. The biggest thing is working with retailers and providing them cold storage options, whether that be mini fridges or freezers, and really by making sure to educate the retailer and explaining that this product is best kept in the freezer, and allowing them to understand, as well as with bud tenders, the application process to get to room temperature before selling that to the consumer. I think by kind of having as a brand focus on the educating of the retail front and bud tender on how to properly store the hash in the freezer, that's proven to have the best success, but it's still a very difficult task nonetheless, especially having to drive around with rosin on dry ice around the state.
So if you make fresh press, the best thing to do is either decarb it, if you want to make carbs out of it immediately, or get it into a freezer.
Yeah, so I recommend that for fresh press, always store below frozen. For cold cure rosin, I think you can get away with a fridge between 35 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you're looking to maintain that fresh press consistency, you need to keep it below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Sweet, great questions, thank you.
Alright guys, sorry, this might be hard to see. I have some information in the table on the next slide, but what I kind of wanted to focus on a little bit is kind of the practical aspect of having extraction done in the rec market. We run a reasonably sized processing facility. We do a lot of toll service work for industry members out here in Vermont. So we get a lot of questions from day to day on, what type of material do we bring in? When we bring in this type of material, what kind of products do we make from it? So I wanted to take a little look at the plant itself from a chemistry perspective to kind of understand what some of the primary components are that will impact the final concentrate. And again, this is from purely a practical perspective. So I'm going to jump directly to the next slide because some of this is hard to read, but from a table. So to sum it up, primary components that will impact or have the most impact on the final concentrate are cannabinoids, obviously, potency, where they're found, trichomes, flowers and buds, terpene components, which are associated with aroma and flavor. Again, mostly concentrated in trichomes, flowers and buds. And then you have your flavonoids, which don't have so much of an impact on smell or aroma, but can impact taste and color. And then finally, some of our undesirable components, lipids and waxes, are chlorophyll, and carotenoids, and then proteins and sugars finally. So one of the primary goals of extracting cannabis flower and achieving, a reasonable concentrate that you can make final products from that won't have too much of an impact from a sensorial perspective on the product, is you really want to get, you want to alleviate your lipids, waxes, your chlorophyll, your carotenoids, and then your proteins and sugars, which could impact shelf life of the final concentrate and have an effect on health risks. So what to bring in for extraction? Question we get all the time, and we're trying to derive as much THC as we possibly can from, say, shake flower that's maybe old that you can't sell. We usually tell people, hey, bring in what you can, and we'll try to produce as much as we possibly can. But the truth of the matter is the better input flower, cannabis plant material, the better output you're going to get, and that's from a taste perspective, a color perspective, as well as a potency perspective. Of course, there's many steps that you can do from processing to increase purity, but the goal is for you guys to be able to perform as minimal steps as possible. Nobody likes processed materials. So, flowers and buds, kind of a no-brainer. But sugar leaves as well. Sugar leaves actually have, a somewhat decent trichomes on them as well. Fan leaves, stems, and stalks. You can throw them in, but they do tend to add this component that comes through as sterols. It's actually a metabolite of some of the fats and liquids, and it's a powdery white wax that shows up. Not only does it end up in the final product, but it actually clogs up some of the equipment as well too. So again, the higher quality of the flower that goes in, the more efficient the processing is, and the better yields that you'll get. What can we do though to improve concentrates in terms of, again, this is in the context of distillate, basically forming, if your intended products or say not concentrates and extracts. So we say you're making beverages, you're making edibles, emulsion-based products, basically to diversify our product portfolio. You can improve overall profile of the distillate by doing additional steps or refinements, but there's also negative components as well as that too, because there's some, basically doing what's referred to as CRC, a color remediation column, involves solid supports or additional chemicals essentially too. And there are some pros to this. You can improve your color and your clarity of your final distillate. You can improve the taste and aroma. Say that you have contamination from pesticides, possibly heavy metals from the soil, remediation. It's certainly an element of it as well. But then the con, of course, is that there are additional processing steps. You're introducing, not the most desirable solvents, and then of course reduced potency and yields would be an effect. It's kind of a basic processing flow. Everybody sort of an understanding. And this is in the context of CO2 extraction, not scientific. You can see that just to form a basic THC distillate, we're doing the first pass distillation or second pass equals a third. We're already in the context of 6 steps here. So every additional step that's performed on material does impact overall yield. So again, the quality of the flower that comes in, the quality of the plant parts, improved yields, improved products. Finally, questions that we always get is extraction methods. Which is better? Ethanol versus CO2 for solvent-based extraction, of course. Again, I always pose the question to our clients, what are you looking to make with the resulting THC? That is really going to dictate the decisions that are made up front as you're getting the process, your flower processed. You can see if you're doing concentrates or extracts, as Joey focused starting with THC distillate, it's for your formula ingredients going to negate any of the negative sensory contributions that the extract might bring in. And finally, if we move into, say, beverage-based emulsions or even encapsulations from powder-based products, in that case, typically purity distillate is preferred for stability and appearance of the final product. Thanks, guys. Any questions?
I'll kick us off. I'm a little bit curious, since you focused on the chemical composition and some of the processes of refinement, did you find that anything happened to really work or not work when working with customers who wanted to come to you with questions about edibles or beverages?
Again, it's probably go back to the slide with the input and the quality of the plant material that was submitted. Again, it's there's a lot of material, byproducts that are created from cultivation, from drying. And the intention is to get as much efficiency out of it as possible. And typically, we would say, bring whatever you can. And we'll see what we can extract, we'll see what we can pull out. However, that really is the impact. It's too many families. That's actually probably one of the biggest culprits. And obviously, the presence of stems and any stalks, they seem to impact the final product the most.
So reduce stems, and I guess I should have been a bit more precise. I've got a lot of people who are interested in acids, things that taste like lemon or orange or a really nice bright citrus boost. Is that going to possibly alter some of the chemical compositions of terpenes or the other things we want to hold on to?
No, because in a sense, in some instances it may. But what I could say is that, citrus notes, whether it's lemon or citrus in general, they share a lot of the common volatile terpenes that cannabis does as well. So in a sense, they're complementary.
Okay.
In the presence of acid, it just depends on which part of the process is being introduced.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure which one of you to ask the question of. This is kind of like both of your presentations. We were talking about cold water restrictions.
Yep.
And you showed metal drums for cold drums. We know the chemistry side of things that cannabinoids are not from the water, so not from oils. So how much are you using? How many of the chemicals are sticking to the sides of the barrel? Is there a law study that's been done on that?
So not a law study that I could refer you to that has been done, but that's a great question. So there's significantly a lot of loss in the ice water extraction process. He brought up a great point about how it's all extraction efficiency is really what I think you're measuring here right now. And it's about trying to get as much of the good inputs from that material out of it as possible. If I'm looking at an ice water extraction compared to a solvent-based extraction, you're going to typically have a significant reduction in yield. You have some streams that may perform better. Material left over and kind of like how you go about that. So for ice water extraction, what I typically find is that after you process that material, that spent biomass that you just removed all the trichome heads from still has typically anywhere between 10 to 15% of the starting THC potency that it originally had. That's not me saying that the biomass is 15% THC, it's just 15% of the proposed 20% it originally was. The biggest amount of material that you actually lose is the terpenes. So we'll actually take our spent extraction material from the ice water extraction process and then run that via microwave terpene extraction and pull back upwards of 1% terpenes by mass from that, which I think really shows the importance of incorporating different types of extraction methods to be able to get all the valuable components out of that starting material, and how one extraction method isn't necessarily going to service all of your goals in the lab.
Joey, is the goal of ice water extraction to trichomes?
Absolutely. So that's what you're trying to target, is the mature, intact trichome heads. And then different from like a filtration bag where you're removing lipids and waxes. You're actually using these filtration bags to catch the suspended trichome heads in the water that's not dissolving in the actual water. So it's really used as like a carrier solvent, and a solvent that dissolves the product.
The way that I like to think about the difference between ice water extraction and just solvent-based extraction is you visualize those really the amazing close-up pictures of trichomes that you see. Essentially, ice water extraction, you're gently pulling them off away, correct? When solvent extraction, you're just smashing them to bits and dissolving all of the compounds in the solvent. So, yeah, it's probably
What's the meaningful chemical difference between like hemp-derived, cannabis-derived terpenes and cannabis-derived terpenes?
That's a great question. My first inclination to respond to that is that type 1, type 2, and type 3 cannabis are all part of the same family of cannabis, and I think it's a very unique marketing word that gets thrown around these days, hemp-derived terpenes versus cannabis-derived terpenes. I think that it's really more about a question of the quality of those starting input terpenes. You could source hemp-derived terpenes from sun-grown farms that are as sensory and amazing, and then the larger kind of question is, in certain states that have different laws than Vermont does for hemp, you could have product that is grown that effectively is THC, but under THCA laws, and then get utilized to create cannabis-derived terpenes. Now these are marketed and sold as hemp-derived terpenes under these laws, so I think it's really more about familiarizing yourself with the source that you're purchasing these from. But from a composition standpoint, hemp-derived terpenes and cannabis-derived terpenes are very similar. What you'll find is that in some genetics that are type 1 cannabis, so delta-9 focused genetics, are going to have typically a wider range of terpenes, and a lot of genetics that are truthfully hemp-derived CBD or CBG genetic focus strains have a very similar overlap of 5 primary terpenes based on breeding projects that created those strains.
So, yeah, chemically, the terpenes are essentially all the same. You're pulling them, from fruits, vegetables, or you're pulling them from cannabis, hemp, or THC type things. What impacts, I think, the difference, right? I'm probably repeating and building off what you're saying, Joe, is the mixture or combination of these terpenes. Flavor, sensory chemistry in general, it's complicated. So there's over 200 identified terpenes found in cannabis in general. And what creates those complicated aromas and tastes, it's kind of hard to nail down. Because in essence, even some of these terpenes, they have very, very different thresholds. So when I say threshold, I'm saying small amounts may have a very strong odor. You take 2 separate terpenes, you put them together, you have one aroma. You get a third one in, it might have a different aroma. It's sort of the symbiotic relationship between terpenes is really what I think it is.
So, but occasionally a potency test for cannabis-derived terpenes lands on my desk. So, like if I were to do a potency test of hemp-derived terpenes versus a potency test of cannabis-derived terpenes, would that be? I assume I would see something.
I think you could potentially see a different blend of terpenes at time, depending on the genetic input of that starting material from that. When you say potency test, you're talking like the actual GCMS data of the terpenes, or like a cannabinoid potency test?
Somebody will take their cannabis-derived terpenes to onward for a potency test.
Cannabinoid potency?
Yeah, I've seen that a couple times.
Okay, yeah.
Come on, I haven't seen it.
Interesting. So yeah, I guess it depends on the extraction type that you're going to do, right? So if you have cannabinoid carryover in your high terpene fraction, you would definitely have a great indicator whether that's hemp-derived or cannabis-derived, right? Because you may see upwards of 10 to 20% of the cannabinoid in that high terpene fraction. For very common terpene extraction methods, whether it's steam or even CO2 being very selective or microwave terpene extraction, these produce non-detect THC and non-detect cannabinoid fraction terpenes. I don't believe from a potency cannabinoid test you have any type of indicator between the two in that regard, depending on the extraction type.
It's actually pretty easy to get candidate terpenes with CO2 extraction with cannabinoids.
Thank you.